The U.S. Supreme Court will review a major case involving abortion, and the governor of Texas signs an abortion ban into law. What are the implications for Roe v. Wade? Notre Dame professor of law Carter SNEAD is here with analysis. A congressional hearing this week looks at the controversial 2022 Winter Olympics in China. Should the United States boycott the Games over China's record on human rights? Human rights activist Reggie Littlejohn and Congressman Chris Smith will respond. Deacon Larry Oney of Hope Purpose Ministries shows how his organization is bringing hope and unity to the poor in Africa and what we can do in the West. Finally, is chivalry dead in modern society? Brad Miner, author of The Compleat Gentleman, has answers and perhaps a few solutions. The World Over begins right now.
Now, Raymond Arroyo.
A warm welcome to all of you joining us in the United States and the world over. What a show we have for you tonight. It's all straight ahead. If you'd like to comment, send me a tweet. I'm at Raymond Arroyo. Lots to cover. First, some news. The president of Malta declared he would rather resign than sign an abortion bill, declaring, quote, "I will never sign a bill that involves the authorization of murder." George Vela, a medical doctor who has served as the country's president since 2019, made the comment in a recent interview. The president's comments come as a bill was introduced earlier this month in Malta's parliament seeking to decriminalize abortion. Malta, located in the Mediterranean Sea, has a population of 500,000. More than 90% of them are baptized Catholics. And here in the U.S., the Supreme Court agreed to hear oral arguments in a major pro-life case in their next term, next fall, Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization, which concerns a Mississippi law banning abortion procedures after 15 weeks. Lower courts blocked the law, but the state of Mississippi appealed the ruling to the Supreme Court. Here with analysis of this case, as well as an important new law signed in Texas this week, is Carter SNEAD, professor of law at the University of Notre Dame. Carter, you've seen the media coverage. Some of it claims that this Supreme Court case imperils Roe v. Wade. How far-reaching could this decision actually be?
Well, the specific question the court has agreed to answer is whether or not any restriction on abortion prior to viability is unconstitutional. Mm-hmm. And if you read Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood versus Casey, a fair reading of those precedents is that, yes, a total ban on abortion prior to viability under those precedents, at least as they've been applied by the lower courts, has been taken to be unconstitutional. So I don't see how they uphold the Mississippi law without significantly modifying, if not overturning, Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood versus Casey.
Wow. Now, I was told by some court watchers and reporters just the other day that this is really about the viability question and when you can prohibit abortion because of the new technology we have today with ultrasounds and heartbeat monitors, that they can detect when that fetus is viable and therefore making that the cutoff point where you can legalize abortion. So anything prior to that would be legal, anything after illegal. So you don't think it's that narrow? You think the implications here could be far broader?
I think it's very significant, yes. I mean, we've seen a cascade of laws, all of which apply pre-viability. We've seen heartbeat laws like the one in Texas that you mentioned at the outset. This law is a 15-week ban. There are other bans on reasons for getting abortions to eliminate children with Down syndrome or for sex selection or to eliminate a child of a non-preferred race. All of these apply pre-viability, and so I think we do need a significant revision in the jurisprudence in order to sustain that. And I'm hopeful that with 6 justices on the court, who all of whom understand that Roe v. Wade was basically a castle built on sand. I mean, they try to situate a right to abortion in the 14th Amendment Due Process Clause, which was ratified in 1868 when abortion was illegal everywhere, and no one thought that it had anything to do with the state's authority to protect unborn children. I think it's long past time the court took action on that.
Well, this, as you mentioned, this is the first abortion case since Justice Amy Coney Barrett, your former Notre Dame colleague, was confirmed. It's also a real test to the court's new 6-3 conservative majority. Given that makeup, how do you think this will go if you had to look into the future? And I know I'm asking you to go further than you'd probably like to.
It's an impossible question, of course. I mean, you never know how justices are going to rule. A lot of us in 1992 thought the Supreme Court was poised to overturn Roe v. Wade when they issued the decision in Planned Parenthood versus Casey to affirm what it described core holding of Roe. I think that there are put it this way, there are 6 justices on the United States Supreme Court right now that I surmise, I have no inside information. I don't know what anybody actually thinks, but based on their record and based on their judicial philosophy, it's hard to imagine any of those justices believing that the 14th Amendment controls a secret right to abortion that has all of these Byzantine dimensions, pre-viability, post-viability, trimester framework, et cetera, et cetera. It's just not in the Constitution. And to say that it is a kind of constitutional violence. And it's hard for me to imagine that those 6 justices know or would disagree with that proposition, that none of them, I don't believe, think that as a matter of original understanding or plain meaning or anything, any legitimate form of constitutional interpretation, that there's a right to abortion. So the only question for the justices is, what do you do about it? Do you let the law stand? Do you let those precedents stand because of the doctrine of stare decisis, or do you act courageously and decide that enough is enough? Our country, our politics has been ruined for almost 50 years. Our judicial confirmation process has been ruined. Our polity is completely polarized. Why not take a courageous step and apply the law as it's written, as it's originally understood, and undo this travesty that has been in place for almost 50 years? As I point out in a Newsweek column today, the cert was granted in this case on the anniversary of Brown versus Board of Education, May 17th, 1954, in which the court was, told that they were going to disrupt an entire system of education by striking down the concept of separate but equal segregation, and they didn't flinch. They did it. Yeah.
But given the media pressure, the political pressure, do you really see them overturning Roe v. Wade at this point, Carter? I mean, if you just look at John Roberts over the last few years, a little political pressure and a few op-eds in the Washington Post, and he starts running in the other direction. That does concern me. I think that is certainly an element, and won't it be an element in the outcome here?
Well, I think there's a hopeful indication in his concurring opinion in the June Medical Services case, which was a disappointing case because they struck down Louisiana's admitting privileges law. But in his concurring opinion, he makes it very clear that he does not believe that the framework of Roe and Casey that require the court to do this political balancing of incommensurable goods, freedom on the one hand versus the lives of innocent children on the other, that's a job that the court can do. So I take his concurring opinion as grounds for some hope that he will have the courage and the commitment to principle to do the right thing.
Interesting. I'd forgotten about that concurring opinion. You're right. As the Mississippi law is written, it would allow exemptions or exceptions, rather, to the 15-week ban in cases of medical emergency or severe fetal abnormality. What happens if Mississippi wins this case? Will this have a ripple effect in other states? Others have obviously put these restrictions in place already and have been battered back by the courts.
Yeah, it depends, obviously, on what the court says. I mean, if they affirm the Mississippi ban and go no further and don't give us any further guidance, I think that would be a mistake on their part, because any abortion law gets tied up for years in court before it goes to the Supreme Court and we get some splintered decision with an oracular holding that doesn't really give states much guidance into what they're permitted to do. The only clean and principled thing to do is to say, Roe v. Wade was wrongly decided. Casey was wrongly decided. This law will stand. And then you've got a whole host of laws like the Texas law, the heartbeat bill. You have laws like Alabama's laws from a few years ago, which was just a total ban on abortion. And so, if they do overturn the case, those precedents, and they say that it goes back to the states for political resolution, we'll see a federalist solution. We'll see a patchwork of laws. New York and Illinois and California will be very permissive, and the states that have passed these laws pre-viability will be more restrictive. I think people will see, if that's the grounds on which they overturn it, that it's not the end of the world for abortion. Sad to say, for people like me, I'd like to see the end of the world for abortion. But it's just the beginning of a new phase of political disputation in which we can actually have a conversation amongst ourselves in the political branches of government and come to some solution on how to govern ourselves.
Earlier this week, White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki was asked about the court's decision to take up this case. She didn't specifically comment on the case itself. Instead, she offered general support for abortion rights. Listen.
Over the last 4 years, critical rights, like the right to health care, the right to choose, have been under withering and extreme attack, including through draconian state laws.
She also added that Biden is committed to codifying Roe in the law. Your thoughts, Carter?
Well, my first thought is it's interesting that she can't say the word abortion. She said the right to choose. It's always a bad sign when you can't even say the word of the thing that you believe is enshrined in the Constitution. That should provide, I think, confidence to folks like us who understand that it's not in the Constitution. Secondly, the notion of codifying Roe has been in the water for a long time in Washington, D.C. There's an interesting question. Well, the question is, I mean, could you do that in a 50-50 Senate when the 50th vote on the Democrat side is Joe Manchin, who purports to be pro-life? That seems not likely. Moreover, there's an interesting question as to whether or not the federal government has the authority to codify Roe. What enumerated power in the Constitution gives them the right to impose a uniform abortion policy across the country? These are hard questions. I think that they're trying to reassure their abortion rights supporters that they are focused on these issues and they're important to them because that's such an important voting bloc for the Democratic Party these days. But I think that I'm not frightened of them codifying Roe, at least certainly not with the current composition of Congress.
Texas Governor Greg Abbott on Wednesday signed into law a fetal heartbeat abortion bill. It bans the procedure after about 6 weeks of pregnancy, and it grants citizens the right to sue doctors who perform abortions past that point. Texas is now aligned with many other states that have banned abortions after that fetal heartbeat can be detected. Are federal courts allowing these state laws to be enforced? And you know, how far does this go? Where is Greg Abbott begging the Supreme Court to crash in and weigh in on this so that you set a national precedent?
Yeah, I mean, this is interesting because that's a more dramatic pre-viability ban than the Mississippi law, which makes the question presented to the court in Dobbs even sharper, because when they know that when they're going to be answering the question, are all pre-viability bans unconstitutional, the Mississippi law is not the only law on the books that they're going to have to contend with. So I hope that they'll take that opportunity to articulate a rule that doesn't require Texas and Ohio and everybody else to spend time and resources litigating the details of their specific cases. So the most interesting thing to me about the Texas law, by the way, is what you said, namely that every citizen under the law has the right to enforce it and can bring claims to enforce the law across the state of Texas. It's a very interesting strategy and will likely keep these cases in state courts, possibly in very friendly state courts who might very well affirm or take steps to enforce this new law.
I want to get your thoughts on it's sort of a related story. President Biden's commission to study the Supreme Court kicked off this week. He formed the commission through an executive order to examine, quote, contemporary commentary and debate about the role of the High Court. Now, this week, the commission met for the first time virtually. For 25 minutes, they all were sworn in. The commissioners explained the 5 areas they'll be studying. Listen.
We're going to look at the justices' length of service and how frequently the court's membership should turn over. And this is going to include proposals for term limits and mandatory retirement.
And then we'll look at current proposals to expand the scope, the membership and size of the Supreme Court, and whether those proposals require other reforms. An expanded court, for example, might require a panel system for deciding cases. An expanded court couldn't possibly sit on all cases all the time.
Carter, you're a law professor. Is there any legitimate reason to study the length of service of a justice? And should we expand the number of justices on the High Court?
Well, it's been a long-standing question as to whether or not life tenure is the right standard for or the right term of office for judges on the U.S. Supreme Court or on the U.S. Courts of Appeals or district courts in the federal system. There are interesting arguments on both sides. I don't anticipate very much change on that particular question. The thing that's obvious about this is that this is just naked politics, right? I mean, there's no reason to expand the number of justices on the Supreme Court unless you're simply trying to affect different outcomes that are more favorable to you politically. And that's the antithesis of what a court is supposed to be. And the entire exercise is corrupt and should be rejected. And to his great credit, Justice Stephen Breyer has been making this argument recently and is even publishing a book making the case, which, by the way, is obvious. If we want our courts to be separate from the political branches of government, when you lose an election and you end up having certain retirements or deaths on the court and certain vacancies, and then your immediate step is to expand the majority so that your side will get a majority, or expand the number of seats to where your side gets a majority. That's a transparently, nakedly partisan act, and every person of goodwill should reject it.
Well, Carter, you're exactly right here. And the thing that when I heard Gerald Nadler this week, who is the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, he came out and said, look, we're not trying to pack the court. That's what Trump did. We are unpacking the court because right now the court is imbalanced. I mean, it seems to me when you start approaching the Supreme Court from that perspective, you're running into the separation of powers that the Constitution creates and prohibits one branch of government meddling unduly in the affairs or creation of the other, right?
It is extraordinary. Senator Mike Lee makes a joke that if they go down this road, what we're going to end up with is every administration of a different party is going to expand the court even more. And then in 20 years, it'll look like the intergalactic Senate from Star Wars. I mean, it'll be a huge, there'll be 150 people on the Supreme Court, and Guam will be a state, and the Marshall Islands will be a state. I mean, it's just a grasping at power when a person is lost legitimately. And look, the Democrats control all three branches of government right now, and yet that's not, all the political branches of government, I should say. But that's not enough. They want to take steps to expand the court and enhance their power even further. And I would be saying the same thing if it was a Republican administration trying to do this. It's completely out of order, and it shouldn't be done.
Yeah, well, to say that, the one administration was packing the court, next week the Republicans will be saying Barack Obama was packing the court. No, he was duly elected. He proposed a candidate, and the Congress that you elected affirmed and confirmed those individuals. That's called the constitutional process of filling a vacancy at the Supreme Court. So this political rebranding of what it means, the size, the scope, the length of tenure, I agree with you. It seems this is all politically motivated, and we all, right and left, should reject this entirely. Carter Snead, we will leave it there, and I want to remind people to get a copy of your book, What It Means to Be Human, The Case for the Body in Modern Bioethics. It really speaks to the undergirding, the foundation of everything we're talking about today. Carter Snead is the author of that book. It's available at bookstores everywhere. Carter, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Raymond.
Here's what I propose, and join those who are proposing, is a diplomatic boycott for heads of state to go to China in light of a genocide that is ongoing while you're sitting there in your seats. It really begs the question, what moral authority do you have to speak again about human rights any place in the world?
That was Speaker Nancy Pelosi on Tuesday calling for a U.S. diplomatic boycott of the 2022 Winter Olympics in Beijing. To discuss the growing momentum of an Olympic boycott against China, we're joined by U.S. Congressman Chris Smith of New Jersey, who co-chaired the hearing on the topic this week, and Reggie Littlejohn, founder and president of Women's Rights Without Frontiers, who testified. Thank you both for being here. Congressman Smith, China, in response to the call for a diplomatic boycott, is saying Pelosi is full of lies and false information. Your idea, and whether you think a diplomatic boycott is a cop-out.
Well, I don't think diplomatic is strong enough. It's not commensurate with the gravity of a genocide against an entire people, the people of Xinjiang, the Muslim Uyghurs, and the Kazakhs. It's the most horrific thing we've seen. 1 to 3 million people in concentration camps, the use of forced abortion and forced sterilization to bring the numbers of children down, the kidnapping of their children and raising them in a non-Uyghur setting. This is outrageous. It's Xi Jinping, the dictator of China, that's doing it. It's his idea. So I think we need a penalty that comports with the gravity of the heinous crime, and then add Hong Kong and all the other human rights abuses that have been worsened under Xi Jinping. There needs to be a change of venue, move it to another city. It could be done if there's the political will. The IOC ought to do that, and we ought to be pushing for it as a country, and others should join us, or just boycott it. You can't go to this is 1936 and the Nazis all over again.
Reggie, you testified to Congress calling for the boycott of the Winter Olympics, saying China's violating the 1948 Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. How so?
Well, okay, as Congressman Smith just outlined, they are committing genocide against the Uyghur people. That has been established by Secretary of State Pompeo, and it has been affirmed by Blinken. So this is a bipartisan agreement that they are committing genocide. They are systematically killing and destroying the culture of the Uyghur people. So in 1948, in response to Hitler's genocide, there were 150 nations got together to condemn the crime of genocide, saying that they will undertake to prevent and punish anyone who commits genocide. We are signatories to that convention, and therefore we are contractually bound under international law to prevent and punish genocide. And as Congressman Smith said, I think that a diplomatic boycott is not strong enough given the gravity of the genocide and the other atrocities that they are committing, such as 400 million forced abortions under the one-child policy and the many other grave crimes against humanity that they are committing.
Congressman, the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee submitted a written statement to the hearing acknowledging oppression of the Uyghur population, but they added past Olympic boycotts have failed to achieve political ends, and they should give all of us pause in considering another boycott. I want both of you to react to that, starting with Congressman Smith.
Sure. Past boycotting certainly has had an impact, but in this case, we are talking about a genocide and assault on all religious belief, including Christians, Tibetan Buddhists, Falun Gong, Muslim Uyghurs. It's called Sinitization, part of it. It is Xi Jinping, again, the mastermind behind all of this, who wants all faiths to grovel before him and his Chinese Communist Party and to take out whole books of the Bible, passages, and then to completely run roughshod over even the officially recognized Catholic Patriotic Church or the Protestant Church. I mean, it is the worst thing. This is like Mao Zedong's Cultural Revolution happening right before our eyes. And we have all of these corporate sponsors like Coca-Cola, Visa, who are going to make money hand over fist, continue their access to China because they are so complicit in this. I will be doing a second hearing. I chaired this one and put it together. We're going to do another one where we'll invite the corporate sponsors, and that the IOC or the U.S. affiliate would not come and testify. I mean, they could have done it by, on Zoom or WebEx very easily, but they don't want to answer the hard questions. Added to this, and this is very important, all of the planning for this genocide happened concurrently at the exact same time as they were getting the Olympics awarded to them in 2015. They pledged to the Olympic Committee that they would follow human rights norms. We can't get any kind of transparency about what does that mean? Where is that written? They have not told us, because it is a farce. And when you talk about the man or woman who's being tortured or the child inside one of their concentration camps, they have little patience for those kinds of niceties. This is a brutal dictatorship, and we should not be aiding and abetting such a dictatorship. Move to another place. It could be done.
Reggie, I have heard people make the argument that, look, these athletes, these American athletes trained for years to compete. They're representing their country. You shouldn't allow them to miss out on the opportunity. You can't boycott the Olympics. You would say what?
Well, first of all, I was a very committed and very mediocre athlete in high school and college. I know what it means to really want to compete, and so the first choice would be to move the Olympics. Okay, the IOC can do this. And if they would just say that they were open to taking bids to move the Olympics, I have no doubt that many countries and cities would step up to the plate. So this can be avoided. But you know what? Even if it means boycotting the Olympics for these athletes, I think it needs to be done because of the gravity of the genocide that is happening today. And I would also say that I think that China should be banned from the Olympics. If we have a new city, South Africa was banned from the Olympics from 1964 to 1988 because of apartheid. And I think that this genocide is equally serious and that China should be banned from the Olympics wherever it occurs. And beyond that, I think that they should be called a transnational criminal organization for the way that they have released the COVID-19 all over the world and fentanyl as well. So that's beyond even banning them from the Olympics.
Yeah, well, it reminds me of Ronald Reagan, who we cut off all ties. You couldn't trade with Russia because of the nature of that regime at the time. I don't know why the same rules don't apply to China, except a lot of Americans, athletes, corporations are making tons of money off the Chinese market, and it's in their financial interest to keep doing it, even if that money or yen are coated in blood. During the hearing, there was a heartbreaking testimony from Raihan Asad. He's a Uyghur and a human rights lawyer and advocate about the imprisonment of her brother, rather. Listen.
My brother Ahmed is a tech entrepreneur, media founder, philanthropist. Before having his life torn away for excelling while Uyghur, he was a tireless peace builder. Chinese media outlets extolled him as a star in a tech world. He was brutally imprisoned, and that was spring 2016. I have learned that my brother has been held and continues to be held in torture by solitary confinement, far from home, since January 2019.
Congressman, what kind of legislation could help further pressure China to end this type of human rights abuse?
Well, we've introduced legislation that would say clearly and unmistakably any product coming out of that region, the Xinjiang region, would be denied coming to our shores, would be inadmissible. Unless they could prove it was not made by a concentration camp. I'm introducing legislation to relink most favored nation status with human rights. Bill Clinton shamefully and I believe cowardly delinked it in 1994, May 26 to be exact. He had all this fanfare going for him, how he was fighting for human rights, and then he blinked and he said, profits trump human rights. We could have made a tremendous difference in the evolution of the government of China had we said it's conditioned. You want trade and you're an export economy, you get it if and only if you have significant progress in human rights. I'm going to introduce that legislation very, very shortly. But they only understand one thing, they being the Chinese Communist Party, and that's power, and that's resoluteness. All of this kowtowing being done by the administration simply enables, they think they could take advantage of us, and they do, and they've been doing it for decades.
I've got to ask you this, Reggie. There was something President Biden said the other day during a Coast Guard commencement ceremony. Listen to this.
There's a saying we use in a different context, a Chinese saying. It says, women hold up half the world. It's an absolutely stupid position not to make sure they represent at least half of what we do.
Your reaction to that and the source of that quote?
Well, first of all, Raymond, he misquoted. This is a quote from Mao Zedong, who took over China, established the Chinese Communist Party. And the quote is, women hold up half the sky, not the world. So he's going to be quoting Mao. He should at least get his quote right. But it's an outrage that he's saying this at the Coast Guard with these young people who are committing their lives to defending the freedoms of the United States and quoting one of the greatest totalitarian mass murderers in the history of the world, whose regime has forcibly aborted 400 million women. Okay, so the Chinese Communist Party since Mao has been one of the, arguably the worst violator of women's rights in the world today and in the history of the world. So for him to lift up that quote in support of women is ridiculous.
And let me add to that, if I could, Raymond. Bill
Very
Clinton
quickly, Chris, go ahead.
already has reversed the prohibition of funding to the UN Population Fund because of its hand-in-glove relationship with forced abortion and forced sterilization. That is outrageous. He's looking to increase the amount of money to the organization that ought to be held accountable for enabling coercive population control and the gender side of women in China.
Congressman Chris Smith, Reggie Littlejohn, I thank you both for your insight. We'll have to have you back. So much to get into in this region, and I thank you for your insight today.
Thank you so very much.
Thank you very much.
When my next guest joined us nearly a year ago, the pandemic was just months old, and the death of George Floyd only days before had sparked a summer of racial division and violence. Here now to share his thoughts on whether there's been progress made and the lessons learned, and to update us on his very important work as president of Hope Purpose Ministries. We're pleased to be joined again by Deacon Larry Oney. Deacon Oney, thanks for being here. Before we get to your work and the really critical work you're doing in Africa, I want to get your thoughts on the lived state of the community today here in the United States. Do you feel we're in a better place than we were a year ago when it comes to race relations? And what are you hearing from your parishioners in New Orleans?
Well, you know, and I certainly can't speak for all of the parishioners in New Orleans, but I am talking to a lot of deacons. I'm talking to a lot of priests about what's going on. But as far as are we in a better place, I think that people are hopeful, and I think that's a good sign. You know, that's a takeoff from our ministry namesake, Hope and Purpose. So we always look to try and bridge and look for the most hopeful side of things. But Raymond, frankly, there's still a lot of work to do. That doesn't mean there's not been some progress, because obviously there's been an elevation of the real pain that people are feeling. Some people are feeling, let's be frank, that African Americans are feeling in the community, in our country. But I think that we can look toward hope, to look forward with things. Are things perfect? No. People are wondering, can we make some more progress? Is it good that we're having a discussion? Absolutely. Is everything perfect? No. But we can look forward together with hope in a hopeful way.
Deacon, I wonder, given all the talk we're hearing about wokeness and critical race theory, are we focusing too much on race and the things that divide us and separate us, and not enough on coming together as a people in order to heal? You know, I came across a line today, we are one in the spirit, it read. Have we lost that thread, not only in society, but maybe in the church?
Yeah, I think we have lost it somewhat, but I think part of the mission of the church is to renew that sense of hope. I mean, yeah, we're one in the spirit, but there's work to do. Even the early church, remember, Peter was being kind of two-faced. He was being one way with the Judaizers and another way with the other brothers coming into the church. So I think the church can be an example. And the scripture says that Paul called Peter out to his face. I think we as a nation, Raymond, have been called out saying, hey, you have some issues. Now, do we need to look forward and hope? I believe so. We can't deny that progress has been made, but we also can't deny that we need to look forward. I think the church, particularly the Catholic Church, 1.2 billion of us, we need to lead the way with this discussion and lead the way with being a people of hope.
I agree. Yeah, and I think it's important not to cave into the worldly visions of what unity is supposed to be. The church has its own vision of unity, and that begins on a spiritual level as a child of God, and I think somehow that gets lost. You know, we collapse into these easy unifying moments that really don't add up to much because they're not rooted in anything. On your last appearance, we talked about the importance of leadership coming from the church, from the bishops as a body. What do you hope to hear from the USCCB coming out of their spring meeting, not only about racial healing, but about the integrity of the sacraments?
Well, I mean, listen, you and I, as Catholic Christians, we know that the Eucharist is the source and summit of our faith. Unfortunately, and I don't speak for anyone except me as a man that loves the Lord, and I'm a Catholic deacon, so I'm not speaking on behalf of the church. This is me. But frankly, the descendants of the apostles, the bishops need to be unified as one. It would be a good thing for them to demonstrate unity among themselves as they speak about the real issues that we have. But the sacraments, that's the strength of the church. But also the word of God. We eat from both tables, Raymond, as you know. We eat from the table of the word and the table of the Eucharistic table. But I think one of the things that we're missing, I was on a show not long ago with Scott Hahn. He said one of the missing links in the new evangelization, I believe it's the word for today, is the clear proclamation of the gospel. We need the bishops to make sure that priests and we deacons who have the privilege to preach are giving the word of God, because we're renewed by the word and by the sacrament, right? John Paul had it. He said that in the new evangelization, the new evangelization has to have a new odor, kind of like in a gumbo. A gumbo is flat. You know what I'm talking about, unless there's some flavor in there. So we need to have some new flavoring in the way that we reach out to people, the way that we try and love people, particularly during these difficult times now, where we can engage people, we can bring them into an encounter with Christ. And we only do that first. The initiation of that encounter, of that relationship, is a clear, gentle, loving proclamation of the truth of the gospel, not watering it down, but a clear proclamation of it.
Well, and having the courage and the fortitude to go out in the middle of a world that doesn't necessarily want to hear it and bring it in all its fullness. That is, it seems to me, is the missing ardor, is the missing piece in all of this, that passion. It's just not there, Deacon, and we need to somehow rediscover it. And as John Paul said, the new evangelization is based on the old evangelization, martyrdom. You got to be willing, to go to the cross for this truth that you're carrying.
Well, Raymond, let me speak to that for a second. As we stand on the precipice of celebrating this weekend, Pentecost, the Holy Spirit is the third person of the Trinity that gives us that zeal and that flavoring to want to go out. Remember what Jesus said in the first chapter of Acts. He says, wait for the promise of the Father. John baptized with water, but in a few days, you're going to be baptized with the Holy Spirit. Peter was weak before the Spirit came. The church was afraid, and they were all hovered together, afraid, much like many in the church right now. Then God, the Son, sent the Holy Spirit on the day of Pentecost, and the church was born. We need a rebirth right now. Some will object and say, oh, that's a Protestant word. No, that's a Catholic word. We need a renewal, a rebirth, a refreshment, a rebooting. We need to start again toward reconciliation with ourselves and with the body so that we can have the zeal to go out. We can only do it in the power of the Holy Spirit, Raymond. That's the only way.
I want to talk about some of that rebirth and the important work that your Hope and Purpose Ministries are doing in Africa. In the U.S., in Europe, I think it's good to see the plight of others because, it puts our minor inconveniences in context. I want to start with this farming initiative in Cameroon that you started in 2016. The idea is to teach people to grow and market their own crops to support their community. We've got some video to share here. 5 years in, what are the fruits that we're seeing here? And where did this idea come from, Deacon? I know it's personal to you.
It is very personal. Listen, there was a young priest that I met in East Africa. Now, he was from West Africa. To set the stage, Raymond, he saved for 3 or 4 years to get to the conference while I was speaking in East Africa and Uganda with Cardinal Turkson, praying for reconciliation, Raymond, as it were, between Europe and the continent of Africa. Isn't that very interesting that here we are now talking about how can we be reconciled as a people in our country right now. But this young man came, and happenstance, but really, I believe it's the Holy Spirit. It was a divine moment. We got together and we learned about his plight. I mean, literally, he was trapping animals to feed. This is a young priest of 31 years old. Now, this young priest, Father Elias, is 35, and now he's managing the farm. Raymond, this is amazing. With just a little bit of money, a little bit of help from some beautiful, generous people, we have transformed an entire village of 5,000 people. I know people say, oh, that's not true. It's true. For the first time in 50 years, we brought water to the Bakassi Peninsula. 50 years. And our little ministry, and we humbly say this, was the one who precipitated the water there. And bringing the water now gave us an opportunity to start the farm. And now there's jobs and water and opportunity now. So we're teaching entrepreneurism. Because people say, well, let's just preach the gospel. That's great. But when the roar of an empty stomach is louder than we can preach, then we have to tend to the needs of those that are in need so that we can prepare their hearts to hear the word of God. That's what we tried to do.
Mm-hmm.
That's
well,
what we
and I
tried
also,
to do.
I mean, your parents were sharecroppers in northern Louisiana, so this is something
Raymond.
part of your family history, and I love that
Yes.
you're passing along, you know, this making people self-supportive and letting them work the land as a way to sustain themselves, and again, that entrepreneurial zeal that I know you have and experience, it's obvious what's happening there. In 2017, you mentioned this, you were doing mission work in Uganda, in East Africa, and a priest there told you of the dire situation due to their lack of schools in Uganda. No public schools, very few private ones. You decided to try to do something there and build a school. Tell me what's happened since then.
Well, you know, now we have the Hope Purpose School under the patronage of St. John Paul II. So literally, Raymond, we're in the middle of at the edge of the bush. We're literally in the bush. But now what has sprang up is a little school. We always work with the bishop when we go, and people who support us, they know that we're trying to go and preach the gospel, but we saw a great need. These children have no schools because they're so far away. They're so far out in the bush. So we started a school. So we've got around 450 children there. And here's a beautiful thing that doesn't get talked about very much. We know that we're struggling in our nation, but we're rich. We're one of the richest nations, if not the richest nation in the world. But in the middle of all of the turmoil with racial strife, I want to give a shout out to Father Robert Cooper, who's my pastor. Raymond, as you probably know, I'm in a predominantly white parish, but that parish in the middle of Black Lives Matter, in the middle of our coming to deal with all the racial tension, they raised money to help me to reopen the school. In the middle of the whole Black Lives Matter and our tension with race, and I told them about where I felt about George Floyd and that pain, and we have to cry out to one another. But in the middle of that, I had the opportunity to offer the word of God and ask them to help people 7,000 miles away. Divine Mercy Parish, my community where Annie and I, my wife and I are members, it was a great outpouring. And I can tell you, when I shared the story about what my parish was doing for that school and those children, the priest, Father Mashave, he was in tears. It was a powerful, powerful moment. So we can be negative. People can be negative and say, well, that's just you or whatever. But God is always acting, even when it seems, I'd like to say, even when you don't see him, he's working. Even when we don't feel it, he's working. He's worked in the hearts of this parish and in the hearts of those children.
I agree with you. And people are called to the good. They really are drawn to the good if you offer it to them. And it seems to me, Deacon, we need these stories and examples right now of people coming together to build something, both a purpose that gives everyone a hope. Deacon, what is the example here? And what you've witnessed, what you've instigated in Africa, can we import in the United States into our own communities to serve this end of true unity? How do we get there?
Well, you know, Raymond, I want to be clear about something. You know, there's an underground poor in many of the cities around our country. We are quietly working with our separated brethren, some of our Protestant brothers, some of the Black churches and other churches to feed the underground poor who have mental issues, et cetera. So we are involved, even in our city here in New Orleans and other cities as well, because we believe that part of the mission of the church is to always be close to the poor. I mean, this is part of our mission with Hope and Purpose. But I think we can import some of what we have there. What we have is we have people that are humble. I mean, I believe for our nation too. Raymond, you know, the last time you and I were together on your show, we talked about 2 Chronicles chapter 7, verse 14. It says, if my people, this is what Solomon was saying, Lord, if we fall into sin, what shall we do? And here's the Lord's response, 2 Chronicles chapter 7, verse 14. He says, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray, seek my face, turn from their iniquity, from sin, God says, I will hear you from heaven, I will pardon your sin, and I will heal the land. I think we're still in the same moment. We need humility. St. Barnett said, humility, humility, humility is a great virtue, and we need to embrace it more in our nation because we have great responsibility. We're generous. We give more than any other nation upon the earth, but we need to be humble that we haven't done it all by ourselves, that God has blessed us and graced us.
Deacon Larry, it's a perfect way to end it. I thank you for the message. I thank you for your work and for being here today. Deacon Larry Oney and the great work of Hope and Purpose Ministries can be found at hopeandpurpose.org. Thank you, Deacon.
God bless you, Raymond.
The decline of American manners, heck, manners in the entire West over the last half century, is profound. Why has public etiquette and discourse grown so coarse? And what's the role of a gentleman in our society? My next guest has been ruminating and writing on that subject for many years. He's senior editor of thecatholicthing.org and author of The Compleat Gentleman, The Modern Man's Guide to Chivalry, now in its third edition from REGGIE. Please welcome back to the program a consummate gentleman, Brad Minor. Brad, thanks for being here. You say in the book, the American Republic, and this is true, I think of all free societies, was founded by gentlemen and depends upon their gentlemanly ideals for both its prosperity and its posterity. Our republic, in fact, is the gentleman and lady writ large. Societal civility is the extension and expansion of individual gallantry. It's all about, or ought to be about, balance and restraint. I have to tell you, reading this today, Brad, is akin to reading a Shakespearean sonnet in a bordello. I mean, has our society, our contemporary culture, lost the ability to even process the things you're writing about here?
Well, I got to take a moment after that, Raymond. That's remarkable. Shakespeare in a brothel.
He was in a few, but
yeah, perhaps he was. I think we all know that civil discourse, whether it's in private conversation or in public conversations, has declined. And there are reasons for this. But whatever those reasons are, we are in a position to make a difference. The whole point of this book is to try and recover the best standards of manhood. Some lady ought to write The Complete Lady someday for the same reasons. And I think we can restore them if we will remember that we must be honorable people at all times, faithful people at all times, that we must love our neighbors and our country and behave as though that mattered.
That is a tall order in a time when, on my way here, I stopped at a coffee shop. I saw two men's underwear, sticking out of the back because the pants are so low, and at least 4 young ladies I saw were wearing slippers outside. So, I mean, this is the cultural milieu we find ourselves in. But in The Compleat Gentleman, you focus on 3 types of men: the warrior, the lover, and the monk, to help define a gentleman. What are the characteristics from each that help define a gentleman? And are these categories still relevant, Brad?
I believe they are. The warrior, and these are, by the way, not just categories of men, but archetypes within the personality of the complete gentleman. I'm not claiming myself to be a complete gentleman, but I can certainly do what people used to do, which is aspire to be so, to be a modern chivalrous man. The warrior is someone who knows that there are things worth fighting for and is willing and able to fight. Now, that doesn't have to be the profession of arms. He doesn't have to study the martial arts the way I did. It can be, as it was in World War II, a matter of, say, being a quartermaster or an intelligence operative. The lover is someone who gives of himself, first and foremost to his wife and children, and then, of course, to his community and to his nation. And the monk is someone dedicated to lifelong learning and to restraint. And I say in the book that restraint is the great lost quality of contemporary American life.
Why are we seeing these gentlemanly qualities you lay out here under attack in society today? I mean, they seem very threatening. What used to be courtesy, gallantry, chivalry is now viewed as sexist, condescending, and mansplaining. What is the cost of jettisoning these ideas that you lay forth to society?
You know, the paradox in all of that is that I frankly have never known a woman who didn't prefer a strong man to a weak one. The cost to us will be possibly the loss of everything. When you hear people denigrating the military, when you hear them talking about defunding the police, I just wonder if people are imagining what the consequences of that would be. And the decency, that honor, gallantry that you spoke of, I mean, these are things that in the interaction between men and women are critical. And we're in a period now of revolution. It's not a violent revolution, except in the streets of some cities in the Pacific Northwest, but it is a revolution of philosophy and of thinking, of orientation, so that everything, because the past has been so completely discredited by the people who don't know anything about the past, who don't study history, that they now think that along with the statues of General Robert E. Lee in your hometown, New Orleans, and other statues of great people, Junipero Serra in California, need to be torn down. We need to cleanse the palate, as it were, of anything that to these people seems at all sour. But gosh, that's just that's chaos that we're aiming towards. And we don't really, I don't think, as a culture, Antifa notwithstanding, want chaos.
Well, you can't fix the future and move properly into the future if you don't learn the lessons of the past, good and bad. I always say this, but it seems we're in this moment of strafing. We're simply trying to erase the past as if it never existed, and bound up in a lot of what you're talking about, Brad, is this notion of patriarchy as a hateful, awful, restrictive organism in our society. I mean, and when you first wrote this book in 2004, wokeism, cancel culture, Me Too, the redefining of social norms really had not taken control of the culture as it has today. Aren't these cultural mindsets the reason gentlemanliness and chivalry are all but dead? Men are afraid to be gentlemen. They're afraid to be men.
Yeah, well, one of the key aspects of the character of a warrior is courage. I don't care how many statues are torn down in pursuit of what they think is somehow a perfect past. And by the way, the only statues of anyone who was perfect are the ones we find in the Catholic Church. And they're statues of Jesus Christ. Everyone else, whether it's the two I write about extensively in the book, Robert E. Lee and Sidney Poitier, they're not perfect people. That's not what this is about. But I wonder, particularly the attack on patriarchy, do the people who are attacking it hate their fathers? Is that what this is about? Is this sort of dark outpouring of the darkest part of Freudianism? I don't know, and I don't care. Because again, I only know what I think are the ideals that we should be aspiring for. As Chesterton says, it doesn't matter how often we fail to achieve the ideals that we've put before us, but it matters terribly if we keep changing our ideals, because we can fail to be perfect, but all those failures advance us along the path to perfection, which we're called to by Christ.
Yeah, at the end of the day, what you're speaking of, and you mentioned fathers there, really, again, we keep going back to, we end up back at the family unit, and whether that family unit is intact, a circle of love and support and nurturing, or ruptured and broken, which our society is now facilitating, in fact encouraging that the brokenness of that Western ideal of family.
Well, any society that can proclaim boldly and in law, even at the level of the Supreme Court, that a man who says he's a woman is a woman, has obviously lost touch with the grounding principles of life, with natural law, which happens to be the basis of Catholic moral theology, but it also is the basis of any sensible philosophy about life.
The term toxic masculinity, Brad, gets thrown around a lot today. Typically masculine behavior has mostly been demonized and defined as dangerous. Is this part of the reason men are having an identity crisis? And you see them running to, Joe Rogan and others for safe harbor, because it's at least a reminder of what it sounds like to be a guy.
Well, I think that there's a lot of frustration among some men. Doesn't bother me at all. They can say whatever they want. I'm at a point in my life have my 74th birthday this year. I just don't care what all of these people say about something like that, because I know perfectly well what it means to be a man, and nothing is going to move me from doing the things I know are the right things to do from showing courtesy and generosity, love, gallantry, all of that. I'll always aspire to it.
There is a huge focus on women in pop culture today, in corporate America, which is a good thing, but it seems now we're moving into an area where society is hurting young men and the image of masculinity by leaving them behind or erasing them from our national story. Are we losing a generation of young men because of that depiction that somehow the real innovators, the leaders, are not men at all, or shouldn't be, because they're too dumb or stupid or, having a beer to figure it out?
Well, we'll only know if we're losing a generation when we get to another generation and look back. I doubt it. I think that the things we're talking about, these qualities of masculinity, are frankly hardwired into us. It is a genetic thing. That's, you and I are XY, our wives are XX. Nothing, thank God, can change that. And so when people are asserting that there ought not to be any differences between men and women, I understand that at one level. It's certainly true before God. It should be true before the law. But in sports, in every other aspect of life, it is not true, and it can't be true. I mean, we're not going to see in the next NFL draft a lot of women being chosen by NFL teams, even as kickers, because the biological differences are too profound. And we are at terrible risk if we think that we can just ignore that.
It's clear if you look at the pop culture, and I'm going to end on this, Brad, with the rise of Bridgerton and these endless Jane Austen reboots, the Hallmark Channel's dominance in cable decade after decade, women are pining for gentlemen, for that romantic ideal. But somehow this is being short-circuited in practice in the wider culture. Why?
Well, because in academia, you have, and academia feeds media. In academia, you have this reductionist notion, basically Marxist in its orientation, that everything has to be torn down, that there is no such thing as objective truth. So as long as academia is going to rule the roost, until people stop accepting the cost, both financial and moral and psychological, for putting up with this nonsense, well, it'll go on.
Brad, thank you so much for the time, for your insight. The Compleat Gentleman, The Modern Man's Guide to Chivalry by Brad Minor, now in its third edition, is available in bookstores everywhere and online, and you can read Brad's commentary at thecatholicthing.org. Thank you.
Thank you.
And that is all the time we had. But before I leave, I want to congratulate my son, Alexander, who's graduating from Notre Dame this weekend. I wore the colors for him. And all the graduates out there. An amazing workload I know you all had in this last year, particularly the difficult year of the pandemic. So blessings on all of you. We are all so proud of you. Be sure to catch us next week. Until then, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, thank you for watching. I'm Raymond Arroyo. I'll see you next time. Bye now.